Okay, so the next section we're going to do here is about the Russian Revolution. And the first section in the Russian Revolution is titled Background to the Revolution. Um, so let's start with some real deep background. Russia had historically been less advanced than the rest of Europe, going all the way back to the Romans. They used to refer to the Russians as forest people, the Germans as barbarians, and then their empire were the civilized, right? Um, well, um, as we move forward in history, we see that Russia is always kind of a step or two behind Western or even Central Europe. Um, in the 1700s, in the 1500s, a leader named Alexander the Great expanded. Was it? Oh, no, Ivan the Terrible, excuse me, expanded Russia's empire massively, taking huge chunks of land in the area um, east of the Ural Mountains. And I got this map real quick. I want to show it to you guys. You guys know I love maps. So here is historic Russia, going back to the year 1300. This little area right here, okay, is Russia. I believe that's Moscow itself. Maybe those people were called the Muscovites, okay, going way back. The Wayback Machine. And then you can see, right, 1400s, there's a little expansion, 1500, we get bigger. And during the reign of Ivan the Terrible is when this expansion takes place, all the way across. They get 60+% of modern Russia during that period. Now, look, true. This is Siberia, the Siberian plains. There's not much there. It's too cold to grow stuff. It's the frozen tundra where just ice on dirt. And historically, the people who lived here were hunter-gatherers. They were maybe relatives of the Mongols who were from this area, the Central Asians. So Russia didn't have a massive military force that they had to conquer, but they did. They took all this land during the time of Ivan the Terrible. You can then see going even further into the 1700s, they expand down. They take the east coast of Russia. They expand into this area of Central Asia. You can see here the time frame as they took a lot of this area of Central Asia in the 1700s. What was this area? They moved into Eastern Europe as well during the 1700s. And 1800s, they take more in Eastern Europe. They take some of this area up here in the 1800s. Russia was expanding a lot in the 1800s. But it's not like they just couldn't keep up with Europe. We learned about Peter the Great, who tried to westernize Russia, but they were just technologically behind. Okay, so much so that in 1905, Russia loses a war to Japan. Now, Japan was the first Asian country to industrialize. We learned that Japan was tough. But it was kind of an embarrassment to Russia. Like no Asian country had ever defeated a European country in war until the Russo-Japanese War of 1905. In 1905, Czar Nicholas orders his soldiers to break up protests in St. Petersburg by firing on them, killing an estimated 1,000 protesters. This is called Bloody Sunday. Now remember that for later in this lecture. Here is Tsar Nicholas, the last of the Romanov dynasty that had ruled Russia for 300 years. The Tsar was also kind of away from the capital during the war with the soldiers, but he did a really bad job. Look, Russia was very unprepared for this war. They didn't have the manufacturing capabilities of Germany or France or England or the United States. Again, they're behind during this period. They didn't have enough guns for their soldiers to trade. Their soldiers were told to run out on the battlefield and grab a dead man's gun. They didn't have enough guns to train. Soldiers were training with broomsticks. And in 1915 and 1916, after winning a few battles in Austria, Germany turns their forces away from France and attacks Russia and devastates Russia, killing hundreds of thousands, millions of Russians during this period. Also, during this period, as he's out of Moscow, he had left his wife in charge. Now he loses touch with his wife. Of course, remember, there's no phones back then. Maybe there's some telegraph. But his wife fell under the influence of a man named Grigori Rasputin, who's this massive man who claimed 6'8". He claimed to have been a healer. He was known to be incredibly strong and very manipulative. Did he have a relationship with Nicholas's wife, the second? Some suggest yes. We don't know. But he claimed that he could help her son, who was born with hemophilia, which is a disease where if you get cut, you don't scab, so you could bleed out, right? They have to wrap it really tight and try to get the bleeding to stop. He says, I can heal your son if you believe in me and give me power. So now we have this guy, and here's a picture of Rasputin, who is in the king's palace, who is ordering the wife what to do, who seemingly has more influence on the wife than the husband. Nicholas II does. And another round of protests break out. This time as a protesting against the terrible war performance by the Russians. And Tsar Nicholas orders his army to fire on the protesters. And this time they say no. This time they say, we are not going to kill any more protesters under your orders. You can't even control your own house or your own wife. And this is going to be the spark that lights the civil war in Russia. Russia will have a revolution. It will turn communist. Vladimir Lenin is going to be the leader of the opposing side. And world history, the entire next 1900s is changed by this event right here, the Russian Revolution.